Right livelihood is everything that goes to support life. It has to do with resource exchange, and it has to do with resource relationships. It has to do with how the things that we do to sustain our lives impress upon our character. The word ajiva, is towards and jiva is life. So giving a sense of the breadth of this path factor. And it's challenging to go to the early sources and find instructions like, what is right livelihood? And the answer being avoiding wrong livelihood. That's right livelihood. And then it's, kind of stops. And then, you go somewhere else and it says wrong livelihood, it defines it. It's, not dealing in poisons and weapons and living beings. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it still leaves us with this enormous difference between the kind of detailed guidance that's provided for monastics and what we poor lay people get to guide our same sense of a whole life path. We're just not in robes, and we're not perhaps celibate, and there's some basic differences, but our aspirations for liberation, for cultivating, culturing a wholesome qualities of the heart, still very much there, right? That's why you're here at these talks. But really, you look at what the monastics got, and there's all these details about food and robes and medicine and how they live and, how they are in their environment. And it's not a casual thing. I mean, there's rules about it as well as norms. So in reflecting on what that means to a whole life path for a dedicated layperson, I drew on the guidance from monastics quite explicitly. And I hope that you find that helpful. However, in doing so, I think we come to the final, destroying the final pillar of any shelter for, if you're trying to keep wisdom and morality separate. You just can't do it. You'll see that we have more questions than answers when we do this. And it's exactly those questions about how we live in the world that make this such a powerful whole life practice that calls on mindfulness, it calls on discernment, it calls on understanding and thought, it calls on care for others and for the natural environment. So even though this is the third of the sila or ethical factors of the path, I think that you'll see pretty clearly that the more we refine and deepen our wisdom, the more we'll be able to have confidence that we're, making some good decisions about how we live. So from the professional standpoint, our minds are shaped by what we do at work. Think about how many hours a day, for those of you who have regular work, which, is something that goes for what? 8 hours a day, sometimes more, 10, sometimes 6, sometimes 12, but a lot every day. And now let me compare that, if you will, if you don't mind, with how much do you generally meditate? when you're not on retreat anyway. Is it 6 hours a day? Is it 8 hours a day? I'm going to guess it's not. It isn't for me. And think about how much time you spend doing anything, even cooking or caring for someone who's ill. Is it going to be 8 hours a day? So you begin to perhaps get a glimpse of one reason that the Buddha might have given a whole path factor over to livelihood in this sense. Because if what you're doing during all those hours is involving lying or stealing or conniving, cruelty, what's it going to do to your mind? If it keeps you stressed and agitated, fearful, what's it going to do to your body mind? So if your livelihood demands wrong speech or wrong actions, I think that we can pretty safely say that's wrong livelihood. And corporate ethics these days are, I'm thinking of especially, the larger corporations, pretty questionable. Stretching the truth is just the norm. And some people in marketing and branding get paid to see how far can we stretch the truth. So it's a challenge, this right livelihood stuff. We always have our benchmark questions. Does it bring harm to myself? Does it bring harm to others? Does it bring harm to both? Or, of course, the other side, is it harmless? So the thing is, if we recognize, let's say, the place we work is maybe less than upright in the ways we're talking about, we've got an extra problem here because this is my livelihood. This is where I get my food. Maybe it's where I get my health care. Certainly that's often the case in the US. And if you have a family, maybe they depend on your having this work. And yet, maybe it's not so wholesome. So major dilemma number one, right? What are you going to do? How can you have the maximum integrity in an environment where maybe you have to stay there, but there's, the values, the core values are maybe not what you would wish. So the understanding of right livelihood as encompassing all resource exchange is crucial. Now, in the professions, of course, you spend so many hours working or so many days or so many years, and you get so much money for doing that. And that's a resource exchange. Money, of course, is simply a symbolic representation of energy, time, energy. And because it's so concentrated and so adaptable to being spent to get the resources from others, you go buy food and you have the resources of the farmers and the marketers and the deliverers and the stores and so on. You go to buy clothing, you tap into that whole thing. You pay your rent. It's money is such a concentrated resource, so powerful. You can see why it's so tied in with identity. If you don't make a lot of money, maybe you don't feel good about yourself, or maybe other people judge you. You feel fine, but other people are judging you. It's tied in with sensuality, because most of what we buy, do we really need it? Sure, we need the basic food. We need the basic clothing, the requisites, which we'll talk about later. But how much of what we purchase do we really need? So what goes beyond the basic needs is a sensual, satisfaction. But remember, these intoxicants, the basic intoxicants of becoming, of identity, of sensuality, they're right at work in money. Bam. And of course, in a culture where money and sex are tied in, it also goes into that pleasure and that identity. In a culture where money and where we live and safety goes, comes in, that is a powerful motivator. Being homeless is not only maybe not so fun, it's not safe for the survival of the body. So this is significant uh, aspect of our paths when we think about the power of our placement in resource exchange. So when we spend money, that becomes someone else's earnings. And when someone else spends money in our direction, whether it's for a business we work for, or maybe we have our own business, or maybe we provide a service, that's someone else's resource coming our direction. And so right livelihood is a concern for consumers, for producers, employers, employees, for business owners, entrepreneurs, investors, philanthropists, all resource exchange. It's enormous, enormous. So we can appreciate the basics. Let's go back to the basics and talk about, now that we have this perspective, wrong livelihood. We can see that business in weapons and living beings, this is from the discourses, the Buddhist teachings, weapons, living beings, meat, intoxicants, and poison. 5 basics. So we avoid those. But now let's remember that avoiding them, we're also not participating in them. Let's say you have an individual retirement account. This is an American thing for those who wonder what that is. It's a lot of businesses set that up for individuals, and that money gets invested. Or if you just happen to have some other money invested, is it invested in any of these companies that do weapons or meat or whatever? And we could easily add to that any number of things: tobacco, any kind of unjust, ecologically harmful businesses. And as we'll see in a little bit, it's not so easy to avoid that stuff, even if you don't have any money to invest. Just by using currency, just by being a member of a country, a citizen of a country that has a lot of power, and you pay your taxes. See, I didn't tell you this would be easy, right? The Buddha also speaks about wrong livelihood as a livelihood that involves, and this is another, there's a number of translations for this: scheming, cajoling, like trying to convince and, connive and kind of get people to do stuff that you want to do that they may not want to do, hinting, belittling, pursuing gain with gain. Uh-oh. Capitalism, watch out. Now, a lot of businesses take loans, and that's, especially in today's economy, perhaps perfectly legitimate. But where does the limit go to the kind of power that accumulates with raw capital? And we've seen the enormous harm that can be done by that accumulated power. That's all pursuing gain with gain. So how do we stand? Where do we stand in our whole life path? You see, that's where it matters. It's a path. We're going to do the best we can. So I said that I would come back to this question of, uh, how poisons and meat and so on uh, can come, uh, present us with problems um, through where our money goes. Um, I just want to invite you the same way that you would expand your mind, expand your heart in metta, just letting the mind open. In a similar way, just open up and get a sense of the breadth of the economic web in which you sit. Think about all your sources of income, all the places you spend money, the communities that you participate in, and how resources flow there. So you're like a vibrating node, intersection in this huge web. How do we know that we're doing our best as regards any of the other nodes that have resources flowing towards us are not in, that those resources aren't coming from cruelty, unfairness, harm. It's one can tremble with such a question. So it's good to also reflect on livelihood as possibly actively good. And this may very well include many or maybe even all of you. So, think of health workers, activists, environmental planners and scientists, first responders, educators, responsible farmers. I mean, the list is, enormous because there are so many professions that are of genuine service, and if engaged with wisdom, with simplicity, with care, with understanding, intelligence, are not only harmless, they're actively good. And this kind of proactive right livelihood, it's good to know that it's out there, and it's good to reflect on, do I feel called in that direction for part of my whole life practice? Even when there's, let's say, not presently opportunities for doing good, there are many entrepreneurial social justice workers, people establishing organizations or going out and doing things and raising the money to do them, or getting together with a group of friends and doing wholesome things actively, social work, therapy, trauma work, bringing food to people who don't have food, and medical care. So there's tremendous opportunity simply because there's so much injustice and so much need. So to give you a sense of the Buddha as a practical teacher, I want to directly read a quote that he said in relationship to right livelihood. It's about doing our work diligently. One is clever and untiring at it, endowed with discrimination in its techniques, and enough to arrange and carry out that work. This is called being consummate in initiative. So the sense that I get from that, and the reason I wanted to share that with you word for word, was doing our work with care, whatever it is. If it seems neutral regarding social good or harm, but doing it with that kind of discrimination, the techniques to arrange it and carry it out, all that, that alone is valued. And it's good to remember that we're crafting our minds, we're shaping our character in these ways as well. And again, to bring up a contrast, think about the toxicity associated with imbalance in wealth, protecting our wealth. The Buddha speaks about, making sure that your heirs don't make off with it, that fires don't burn it. He's got this whole list of things that can happen when you accumulate wealth. But in our modern times, think about all the money and thought and fear that goes into locks and police and bodyguards and armies to protect and gain wealth. So we can ask ourselves, again, since some of us come from countries that are well off in relationship to many other places in the world, do we live with modesty? Do we live in a way that's balanced? So in a world of gross disparities, what does balanced even mean? The poverty level now is like a $1.90 a day earning. $1.90 a day. Wow. That's, that's probably costs more electricity for this online meeting than that amount of money. So where is balance? And we remember that overspending, which we may or may not do, but these are the uncomfortable reflections we're invited into, leads to dependency on the comforts and the entertainments. I don't know if you've heard that saying that luxury comes as a guest, but it stays as a host. It's in charge. We're stuck. So what is just? So as a practice, giving attention to the resources that are flowing into and out of our lives, which, by the way, is a mundane practice of right mindfulness, yeah? In order to do this, watch where your money goes, your other resources, your energy, your work time. It's an entry point for the practice of wisdom and this virtue practice of right livelihood. So right livelihood encompasses all economic interactions, which includes the support of our families, the social and environmental impact of where our money is, or the stores we shop at, how we pay the babysitter, the charities we support, the causes we give to. And it's also the movement of resources across nations. So now, in order to be respectful of the time that we have for this talk, I'm going to go into the 4 requisites and a couple of other requisites as described and taught for the monastics, the nuns and the monks, and I'll apply them to our lives. But I want to be clear that each one of these requisites is something well worth diving into with a fair bit of thought and time. So this is just touching it, and we'll go further on Tuesday. And of course, we have our Thursday depth talk as well. So the Buddha spoke about 4 requisites for the monastics, and these are things that they are, you might say, entitled to. These are things that they can, even if they need to, some of them, they can ask for, like shelter or something. not so much food. But so monastics, remember, aren't in the early Buddhist tradition, don't handle money. They don't store anything. They don't store food. So you have to picture being in the world completely dependent, completely. And so in saying that these four things are, I'm going to give you some guidance on how to relate to these four things, and it's okay to receive them. They're quite foundational to this vulnerable being in the world. They are food and clothing and shelter and medicine. So, with all of the guidance given about these, I want to simply move over to us as lay people and ask how we relate to each of these requisites ourselves. So food, I mean, you can't survive very long without food, pretty basic stuff. How do we relate to food? Does the food that we eat, is it too much? Is it high luxury? Is the food itself produced in a way that is non-harmful to beings, to the environment? Is it non-harmful to humans who might be working in fields where pesticides are sprayed or who are underpaid? Of course, in different countries, it's often a very bottom tier social strata that's working the fields. Are they being supported? Do they get health care? Are their children getting educated and cared for? Are they being paid enough to have a dignified life? When I have my fancy strawberries or, my out of season fruits, I don't know. It's worth thinking about. And what about animal products? When you eat an animal product, someone somewhere is being paid to kill that animal. That's just how it works. It doesn't work any other way. You okay with that? And what about those foods that are grown on what used to be land divided up amongst indigenous peoples, and they were colonized by pineapple growers, by sugar cane growers, by tobacco growers, colonized by banana growers. And now those areas are monoculture and they can't even survive with their own, local gardens. They have to work in these fields. So what do we do? What's your decision? So the questions of economic justice, questions of health, questions of environmental impact, all come into our ethical considerations in a world that's very different from the Buddha's time. He had other ethical questions that maybe were a little bit more alien to us, but we have plenty of questions that are not addressed, and you begin to see the call for wisdom, don't you? So moving on to clothing, once again, the environmental impact. Maybe you have a clothing made out of a synthetic fabric, and that comes from petroleum. Is that okay? Oh, no, I only wear cotton. Oh, wait a minute. Cotton it demands a lot of irrigation and a lot of pesticides. Uh-oh. Well, which is least environmentally harmful? Do you want to know? I don't know. It's going to vary by product. But these are questions that are designed to make us uncomfortable because we live in this flow of resources in this interconnected world now. This was not the case in the Buddha's time. So, welcome to the world as it is, and write livelihood as a moral practice and a wisdom practice. What about the people working in the factories who make your sneakers or your inexpensive clothing? Are they getting paid well? Do they have fire exits? Are they safe? And what about how much do we need? Go to your closet. How many shoes do you need? And of course, shoes and other items of clothing are associated not only with keeping your feet safe, they're associated with identity. They're associated with your profession, with your job. Maybe you have to have a certain quality of shoe or something like that. But do you need many pairs or not? And this is not a judgment, because not only do I not know what's in your closet, maybe it's okay to have, a larger number of shoes. I'm not giving answers here, but I am raising the questions. And what about shelter? Again, the monks, the nuns could even ask for shelter if they were stuck somewhere. And, they were told, just as they would wear any old rags and they would eat any old scraps for shelter, they, stay at the root of a tree or in a hut. Even the Buddha, who was, an enormously respected, famous teacher in his own time, would stay in a potter's shed and stuff. I mean, you read about this. He'd sleep under a tree, lay out his cloth and sleep under a tree. And he said that, oh my gosh, the decline of the dispensation is going to come when people sleep with cotton wool in their pillows. I've got a decent pillow. So how's that? it's we don't have to wear what is it, hair shirts or whatever those things are, that those symbols of intentional discomfort. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm trying to raise the questions now about shelter specifically. Are our homes modest? Are they large? Are they large not by our standards, but by the standards of, averaging out global? Traveling in both in Eastern Europe, like in Budapest to teach, and in South Korea, these large apartment blocks, and people have very small apartments. Many people have good, dignified homes rather than a few with, extravagance. And then many people, of course, either homeless or living in poor circumstances. Geez, it's great living in the country, isn't it? Well, that house that was built in the country has made it now, has an environmental footprint, doesn't it? All the concrete that's been brought in and all the excavation. So it's, there's a lot of approaches to those questions. And then finally, medicine as a requisite. Is there equity? I'll tell you honestly, I feel troubled about the cost of my cancer treatment. So many people in the world don't have that. And it allows me to survive. Unfortunately, it allows me to continue to teach Dhamma. But wow, even my copay, my insurance covers, maybe 2/3 of this maintenance drug I'm on. Even just 1/3 of it is really expensive every month. Is that okay? What's okay? And how do we relate to medicine in other ways? Do we treat it with care? Do we overindulge in any way? often guided, of course, by fear of pain, fear of death. Now, there's a couple of things that weren't formal requisites, but I'll mention them briefly because they do come up in the discourses as well. Specifically, transportation comes up in the discourses as being something that might be needed. So, what about our transportation and our place on the planet, the moving of resources, and the decisions that it brings up, the difficult decisions? As a meditation teacher, do I fly somewhere to teach the Dhamma? And if I don't, and everybody flies to where I am, that's, 40 times as much jet fuel. Do you travel? Do you fly when your mother is ill? When she's dying? When she's fine, but you just want to see her or she wants to see you? And there's an impact for that. Just purchasing a car, the amount of environmental waste associated with one car is enormous. I don't just mean the fuel and the exhaust. I mean the leftover upholstery and the impact of, the use of steel and plastic. Enormous impact. So what's right? What's fair? What's good? So we remember that every movement of resource that we participate in has an impact. So your credit card statement or your checkbook or whatever, it's a moral document. You can read through your credit card statement, and that each item on that list has moral impact, just as we talked about with right action, every action. And now this is every movement of resource has an impact. So I'll close by speaking a little bit about dana, about giving, because that too is not only a movement of resources, giving, but it's perhaps the most beautiful, powerful, profoundly good movement of resources that indicates not only is it a way to cultivate a good heart and to bring peace and happiness, but giving is also an indication of the mind and heart already cultivated. So think about it in terms of these 8 criteria of Dhamma that we talked about. Giving leads to dispassion, not to passion. Giving leads to being unburdensome, not to being burdensome. Giving leads to being unfettered, not to being fettered. And think of it as an act of relinquishment, of letting go, which is a key direction of the whole path of detoxification, right? That renunciation, relinquishment. And in the act, in the giving is a relational act. And in that relational act, there's a sensitivity to the other that is invoked. What is needed here? So we come out of our own shell, and the resources that are coming into our lives move through us. They don't get stuck. And we become part of a flow. And I'm not just talking about dana as giving to support the Dhamma. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm talking about all giving that has this, like non-stickiness to our resources. Decentering the self. Cultivating care and compassion. Respect. And the kind of empowerment that you have, this action. It's a social action to give. So you're actually manifesting, using the strength that has accumulated from your gathering of resources. You've done this work, you've got this energy, you've got this resource, and you offer it, and you're offering, you're empowering. You're engaging your own power, and you're empowering others. And you're participating in a flow. And I will say that the specific aspect of dana, of giving, as it relates to supporting the Dhamma, you can see, perhaps with this reflection on right livelihood, the power that the Buddha ascribed to wise use of resources. And you can see then why the monastics were given this very clear guidance. Don't store anything, don't have money. They're living a certain kind of life that lets them do a certain kind of work, and that's to be respected. But overall, the whole of the Dhamma is a non-mercantile enterprise. It's not participating in the system that so easily distorts our values, our energies. But that can only happen if we participate in it, if we support it. So as this flow of resource, if you can understand right livelihood as this flow of resource, then you can understand the significance in cultivating your own mind, the freedom of giving, and the significance in what you give to others as an enormous act of compassion to keep the Dhamma alive and beautiful in a world where so much is measured by financial instruments and values. So I leave you with that, and just remembering that right livelihood is sila in its economic mode, in every possible way of resources. So thank you, and I wish you good practice. I'll see some of you on Tuesday, and we can talk about how we can actually practice with these profound teachings. Thank you very much.
Gregory, there's a question that came in relative to something you said earlier. You said, pursue gain from gain. What did you mean by that, please?
Well, that is exactly a description of capitalism. So money has been gained, and now you're using the money to lend it out or to otherwise take the power that is accumulated there and get more resources and more power by resting on and employing that gain. Now, that doesn't mean that can't be done for good. I mean, there are philanthropic organizations that earn their money through investing and then use that money for, enormously good things. So, and also I want to remind us that I also pointed out that these days, debt is much more deeply built into our social system than in the time of the Buddha. In fact, actual money as such, the currency, was not even in wide use. I'm not even sure it was in use at all. Gold was, but currency, I don't think so. And so it's a very different world with debt being a place to reduce the friction in economic systems. But then, of course, people are very smart. They find their ways of inserting themselves in that system to benefit themselves, like siphoning it off. Think of bond traders and investment bankers who basically they don't produce any food, you know? They don't produce any clothing, they don't produce any medicine, and they make billions of dollars because they found out where to insert themselves in the financial system, which, because of information technology and multinational flow, just, you know, you siphon off 0.01% of something and you can be extremely wealthy. So that's pursuing gain with a little bit of um, moralistic commentary from Gregory Kramer.
Then the next question is, can you speak to the relationship between the middle way and right livelihood?
Wow. Beautiful. Well, I think the place that I'm called right now to to bring that in would be uh, to express compassion for all of us who are embedded in privilege. The teachings that I'm offering here today are particularly challenging for those of us who are privileged with secure home, secure food, plenty of clothing, plenty of, adequate medicine, um, and also have the privilege of surplus, because it's in that surplus that these difficult decisions come up. Where in my life, in my lifestyle, in my choices, am I being modest rather than self-aggrandizing? Where in my lifestyle choices and in my work am I being unfettered versus fettered? And all those basic questions, right? And the middle way for me here calls up a sense of, okay, maybe right now I can aim my mind towards simplicity, and on a global scale, I can remember equity and inequity and just do my best and to be kind to myself as I do this. Now, if you're inclined to ignore this talk that I've offered, ignore these teachings on right livelihood that draw on the austerity of the monastic life to reflect on our very luscious lay lives. If you're inclined to ignore it, I would say then don't go the middle way. Torture yourself a little bit. Feel bad about it. But if you already are seriously thinking about it, I counsel this middle way of kindness, and let the actions come where they are genuinely um, workable. You find your edge of discomfort, and find what side of that you want to be on in terms of what you relinquish, what you maintain, and reflect also on this aspect of giving, because one of the things that comes with surplus, with not just being, as they say, hand to mouth, you have some surplus, is the capacity, the ability to give without and still survive. It's a real privilege.
And here's the next question. I have considered that communication is a sixth requisite after the first four, plus transportation. What do you think of the necessity of communication technologies for living well today?
I think you caught me because that was the sixth I was going to cover and I didn't. So I absolutely agree. It's actually in my book, and I talk about it with enough detail, including what do you do when your computer wears out, the ecological impact of that. But yes, digital technologies, communication technologies, I think are they rise to that level of consideration, right, along with transportation and medicine and so on. Not quite as basic as medicine, but you know, pretty important. So some of the considerations are, what do we, what technologies do we engage? Is there equity there? What is the environmental impact of the technologies we engage? And how does it fit in with our own sense of modesty, simplicity, and the aim of the path? An enormous amount of good comes out of communication. We're doing it right here now. This is sharing of Dhamma made possible by these communication technologies. And this is a very high use that we're engaged in. We take it for granted. Well, of course, I just have a Zoom thing on Sunday. I better get to my seat right now. It's just like life. But think about what we're doing. Oh my God. The Buddha walked all over northern India in bare feet, and people came to see him in bare feet and sat God knows where, eaten by insects, to hear the Dhamma. And look at us. This is great. And, so there's tremendous potential in the power for the good, just as there is in all these things. None of these things are bad. They're just they're what we live with, what we need to live. So, how do we engage wisely? It's that wisdom morality connection that I keep talking about.
The next question is, previously I was thinking that I am doing quite well in terms of right livelihood by changing my job from marketing to psychology related to children's work. But after hearing your talk, Greg, I do feel that in this era, this is not enough.
Oh my God.
But if I need to further raise my bar, as so much is involved, and I do feel that if I do need to do more, I'd need to do more information search in every aspect of my life. I feel that the mind would like to step up, but it also feels like the possibility is endless. Any advice? And thank you.
Oh, bless your heart is all I can say. I'm so glad the question about the middle way came first, because this is exactly what I was afraid of. I mean, how impressive, how inspiring that you actually left a career, changed careers to do good. I mean, I'm touched. I'm impressed. I love it. I bow. I think we all should bow. Um, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. It's beautiful. And, um, it reminds me of, so you should sit around, as the Buddha said, happy and glad, training day and night in wholesome states. I mean, how great. So reflect on it and feel good. I don't want to say any more almost. I mean, yes, we can all continue in this direction of the wholesome. We can all do that always. And uh, And yes, it is an information gathering process, this right livelihood stuff, when you consider the requisites and how we live, because there's so much we don't know. A lot of what I know about the food, for example, was because I used to give some talks in schools on, uh, these issues of global hunger. And so I learned about colonial uh, impact on indigenous food growing and so on. It was just shocked me. And it made me think about, wow, what about this pineapple? Coffee, cocoa. I mean, this is part of it's a vicious world. So yeah, the more you learn, the more it's like, here's the problem though. If you don't approach it with kindness and compassion for yourself and for others, and if you don't cultivate equanimity, you will build up stress and even hatred, and it will be harmful. So we don't want to be one-sided about this. We really want to understand that it is a complicated world. We do our best, and that all of the qualities of the heart that we treasure, metta, this profound friendliness towards everybody, including people who are exploitive and cruel. Can we have the equanimity to let them into our hearts? And can we be kind to ourselves when we recognize that, even my inside dialogue cup, probably, I mean, who knows what the working conditions were of the person who made this cup that I drink out of? I don't know. But as I inform myself, I'm waking up. As I am mindful of how I use resources, I am cultivating mindfulness. As I investigate my own mind while engaged with what I'm eating, what I'm wearing, then I'm developing a sense of investigation of mental qualities. I'm developing the energy of practice. I'm developing even the joy of coming to discover how things actually are, even if they aren't as I would like. So we keep this in the context of the totality of our path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi, right calm, gathered mind. So that's, it's a very touching question that you ask, and I really wish for you the joy of reflecting on what you've already done. And yes, there's more to do, and isn't that beautiful? So it's about time. Are we okay, Anita, to close, or is there a, yeah, okay. So I hope that you feel um, this breadth of the path in contemplating this path factor of right livelihood, and how that we stand in the web of resource exchange that is not only global amongst all human beings, it's global amongst all beings, that all of the animals and the insects were all involved in this, that the climate emergency grows directly out of our unwise use of resources, and that we can participate wisely with care. So reflecting on beings that are impacted, beings that are suffering, those that don't have enough food, the homeless, or those living in very difficult circumstances. Let your heart tremble with their suffering. And reflecting on beings who have no safety, and even those that are perhaps wealthy and powerful, but lost in their hearts, stressed and fearful, distracted, confused. May they too be free. May all beings, without exception, far and near, may they all be free from suffering. May there be peace. May there be peace. May there be peace. Well, thank you, friends. I hope it's a good week of practice, and I hope you have people to practice with. It's really good to have companions, especially as we get into these, wonderful challenges. So see you soon, I hope.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.